Welcome everybody to this planning meeting on the, we got the feedback. Anybody got there? Perhaps it was me. No?
Seems to be better.
Yeah. Okay, try again. So yeah, welcome to the planning meeting for the 12th of September. I'm Councillor Phil Murphy, Chair of the committee. Dale?
Good afternoon, my name is Councillor Dale Rook, I'm Vice Chair of the Planning Committee.
Officers, Craig? We haven't got Craig a minute. Andrew?
Yep, Andrew Jones, Development Management Area Manager.
Amy Longford, Development Management Area Manager.
Philip Thomas, Development Services Manager.
Adam Foot, Senior Development Management Officer.
Craig?
Craig O'Connor, Head of Planning for Monmouthshire.
And Paige?
Paige Mosley, Solicitor to Planning Committee.
Richard Williams, Democratic Services.
Okay, thank you everybody. We go to the agenda now, and do we have apologies for absence, Richard?
No apologies, Chair, but I believe Councillor Howells will be late.
Okay, thank you. And do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor McKenna?
Yes, regarding the Euro Garages application, I just declare a personal interest. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And we now move to the accuracy of the minutes of the previous meeting. Everybody's had the opportunity of reading them. Can somebody propose Councillor Webb? And seconded Councillor Cook. Thank you very much. We'll now move to the agenda then. And the first item that we're going to deal with this afternoon is item 4.3 on the agenda, Gatley Barn. Andrew.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll just wait for the slides to appear. So this is a full application for the conversion of a building to residential use, as well as the installation of a sewage treatment plant. The proposal would provide a 3-bed dwelling, and the former lean-to element would become a carport. In addition, a residential curtilage would be identified with a post and wire fence and driveway to be created, and the vehicle access would be provided by that which is existing. So just to confirm, members and members of the public watching online and in person, the reason that this application is presented to Planning Committee this afternoon is at the request of the local ward member, Councillor John. So whilst a number of the members will have seen the site during Friday's site inspections, I'll just talk you through the photographs now for the benefit of those that weren't in attendance. So the first slide you can see on screen now is the existing building. This is taken from the east of the site, as the annotation shows. Turning to the next slide. So this shows the existing southern elevation of the building. This is the view of the north elevation. The label there is the existing east elevation of the building. And this is taken from, stood inside the building as it stands in situ. So that shows the site there, which is located within the open countryside, and I'll come on to that point later. So just to run through the submitted drawings in support of the planning application. Just do that quickly now to set out the proposal. So this shows the application site edged in red, and the building that's subject to the conversion is, I suppose, at the most southwesterly point. If Phil, thank you. Yeah, I can just hover over that just to confirm clarity on where it's positioned within the site, the red line boundary. So this is the structure as existing. You can see there that sort of accords with the photographs we can see with the remaining elements in situ. And that's a site plan that shows the proposal in its current form, and then post-conversion, post-development on the right. And these are the proposed elevations that would, as I said earlier, provide 3-bed residential dwelling house. So I think the next slide is just a summary of those issues, and I will go through those now. So I think it's pertinent in this case that before I run through the key material considerations, that we provide a brief overview of the planning history of this site. Firstly, in terms of the structure's history, an overview is provided in paragraph 1.1 of the officer's report. So I won't repeat that verbatim, but of note here was that the clarification that in 2012, the Pine End gable collapsed and was rebuilt. In terms of the planning application history, permission was refused in 2016 to convert the structure to a dwelling on the basis that it required a substantial amount of reconstruction and rebuilding and would effectively result in new build unjustified dwelling within the open countryside. And a second reason for refusal at that time was in respect to harm to wildlife interests. Further to that, in 2017, an application was made again to convert the structure to a dwelling, and this was done having regard to Technical Advice Note 6 and the basis of a rural enterprise dwelling. The LPA refused this application on the basis that it failed the relevant criteria within TAN 6, and that it would therefore result in a new build dwelling in the open countryside. This decision was subject to appeal, which was subsequently dismissed. The appointed inspector concluded that the proposed dwelling would constitute unjustified new development in the open countryside that is not grouped within existing buildings, that was contrary to our policies S1 and LC1 of our still current LDP. Finally, in regard to the planning history, an application was refused in 2022, again on the basis that it would constitute a new build dwelling in the open countryside, and was also citing the resulting harm caused to the wider Wye Valley area of outstanding natural beauty. So in terms of the application before us this afternoon, in terms of our consideration of the application, officer's view remains consistent with that of previous decisions taken, as well as that made by the appointed planning inspector. Turning firstly to principle, in the context of our adopted local development plan, the site is located within open countryside. Policy S1 of the LDP states that in the open countryside, the only new dwellings that may be allowed would involve the conversion of rural buildings under Policy H4, subdivisions and dwellings associated with a rural enterprise. This application, therefore, falls to be considered under Policy H4 of the LDP, which, as I said, is for the conversion, rehabilitation of buildings in the countryside for residential use. And of particular relevance within H4 is Criterion C, which clearly sets out that proposals should not involve substantial reconstruction. You'll have seen section 6.1 of your officer's committee report providing a detailed assessment of the proposal against this criteria, which I'll not repeat verbatim, but its conclusions are clear that only a small part of the original walls would be retained, and therefore the proposal is in effect a new build. No evidence has been provided at this time to support a rural enterprise dwelling, and therefore the application has not been considered against the requirements of TAN 6. As noted previously, the proposal is therefore fundamentally considered to be unacceptable. Consistent with previous decisions at the site, officers maintain the view that the proposal fails to meet the relevant requirements of Policy H4 and therefore constitutes an unjustified new build dwelling within the open countryside, contrary to both local and national planning policy. In respect of visual impact, the site, as I stated earlier, is located within the Wye Valley AONB, and the proposal would be located on the side of a hill and would be visually prominent in the wider landscape, especially when viewed from the west. There are also a number of vantage points afforded by public footpaths to the west of the site. Policy LC4 of the adopted LDP sets out that within the AONB, development must be subservient to the primary purpose of conserving and enhancing the natural beauty of the area. This proposal would result in a new dwelling being located within the open countryside. The proposed residential dwelling, with the associated curtilage and other domestic items, driveway and parking area, would significantly alter the character of the area, and this view is endorsed via a detailed objection from the AONB office. With regards to biodiversity, the proposal does provide a means of ecological enhancements by way of new planting that would include, but not limited to, a wildflower meadow. However, insufficient survey work has been provided to enable the local planning authority to consider the 3 tests as set out under the Conservation of Habitats and Species Regulations 2017. Whilst officers have advised that further survey work would be required, this would be at additional cost and delay to the applicant and would not overcome the fundamental in principle and overriding concerns with the development. As such, the application is presented to you with an outstanding holding objection from our in-house ecologist and a reason for refusal based on this lack of information. In respect of surface water, a holding objection has been received from the Lead Local Flood Authority and the SAD's approving body. This application has not demonstrated a means of surface water discharge, and without a suitable surface water destination, the site may not become developable, and this lack of information also forms one of the reasons for refusal. With respect to sustainability, both the LDP and Planning Policy Wales encourage sustainable development and promote making the most efficient appropriate brownfield land. The location of the site is not sustainable, given that the residents of the new dwelling would be reliant on a car to access facilities and amenities. Having regarding to the sustainable transport hierarchy that's set out in PPW 11, officers respectfully disagree with the case made in the Support and Design Access Statement and are of the view that the site would be dependent on the private motor vehicle with limited onward access to more sustainable modes of transport. In conclusion, having regard to relevant planning policies, as well as all other material planning considerations, the development is considered to be unacceptable in principle. The extent of rebuilding required would constitute a new dwelling in the open countryside. Officers, therefore, maintain their consistent stance that the proposal fails to meet the key criteria of Policy H4. There are no material changes in circumstance or policy provision that could justify officers departing from this long-standing position. On the basis of this, in addition to the 3 other reasons for refusal relating to harm to the AONB, as well as insufficient information on surface water and ecology, the application is presented to you this afternoon, members, with a recommendation of refusal. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. I note there's been a recommendation for refusal from Chaddock United Community Council as well. Can I remind members that you need to keep your cameras on all of the time, please, and use the hands up in the chat rather than on your screens. It makes it a lot easier for me to keep tabs on what everybody's doing. We have 2 speakers on this particular application, the local member, Councillor John, and the applicant's agent. Councillor John, you have 4 minutes and 2 minutes at the end if you wish. Alternatively, you can take the 6 minutes now. So, Councillor John.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'm happy to take my time now, if that's okay. Grateful for the opportunity to say a few words in support of this application, and I'm also grateful to elected members and officers, not just for their consideration today, but for all of those who had the time to come on the visit on Friday. Gethley Barn was originally built in the 1700s. More recently, the property has fallen into some disrepair, particularly since the roof was stolen in the mid-1990s. The applicant is an agricultural worker at Llananant Farm and wants to stay not just in her own community, but also needs to be close to the family farm itself for work purposes, but also for her health. The applicant manages and milks the cows at the farm, and this property would be an extension of that. The applicant had a serious stroke in September 2020, as you will have seen in the doctor's letter that's been provided. For that reason, she needs to be close to her family, and this barn would make ideal accommodation for an agricultural worker, such as the applicant, and as I say, really closely linked to the family farm. At the moment, the building has fallen into ruin and it's a blot on the landscape. The applicant's proposal would turn this eyesore into a home for a young person, precisely the sort of low impact, affordable property that young people in Monmouthshire are crying out for, and the sort of property that the council is committed to delivering through its corporate plan. We believe that this is not just the average application that I'm sure you receive regularly for properties in the open countryside. It's different because of its proximity to the family farm, the fact that the building dates back to the 1700s on this site, and of course the applicant's very specific personal circumstances. The proposed design is sympathetic to the building's historic background, and its rustic character is proposed to be protected. I believe the visual impact on the Wye Valley area of outstanding natural beauty is minimal, and the building is proposed to be in keeping with similar barns in the local area. So for those reasons, I would urge members to vote in support of this application because, as I say, I think that there are very specific circumstances that do make this quite different to the ordinary application that you might see, the speculative application for a property in the open countryside. So for those reasons, I'd encourage members to vote in favour of this application, please. Thank you all very much.
Councillor John, thanks for that. We have nobody from the Community Council and no objectors have registered to speak, but we do have David Glasson, the applicant's agent. David?
I'm David Glasson of David Glasson Planning. I'm a Chartered Town Planner and I'm a planning consultant for Laura Pritchard, the applicant. Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to address the committee this afternoon. This is not a typical Monmouthshire barn. Research shows it goes back to 1765 as a threshing barn and is a survivor of the ancient Gethley Farm hamlet. It even remains standing despite the Luftwaffe's efforts in the last war. Repairs have been undertaken over the years, more recently in 2012, which was due to high winds. All barns need repairs. It's a fact of life, but new uses must be found or they will be lost forever. Our client, Laura, who's a farmer's daughter, has tried unsuccessfully to purchase a one-bedroom property in Devorden, but is unable to get a mortgage for a single person with an agricultural wage, even with a large deposit. Laura needs a permanent home close to the farm for her health and work, which involves managing the cows and milking them, but also for family support, which she needs on a daily basis. Laura intends to have sheep with a wildflower meadow, native trees and beehives to ensure there's a pastoral setting, which does not impinge on the OMB. She will contribute to a Section 106 if needed, subject to the details. We wish to make 5 points in regard to the officer report. The officers have appended a previous appeal decision for rural enterprise dwelling. This is not relevant to today. It was lodged by our client's father and was considered under an entirely different policy context. The application before you is for a conversion and should be considered under policy H4. 2. Policy H4 is satisfied in all respects. The officer report is misleading in its claim that only a small part of the original walls are being retained. It is in fact the majority. The officer report bears no relationship to the structure report by Vale Consultancy. I quote, The front gable of the barn is in a suitable condition with no visible signs of rotation. The return walls on either side of the front gable elevation are also in very good condition. Is this a barn needing to be significantly rebuilt, as officers claim? No, it does not. The officer has painted a wholly negative picture of this barn, as while repairs will be needed, it is quite false to claim the majority needs to be rebuilt. Barn conversions often need an element of repair, and even officers have a rule of thumb allowing up to 30% rebuilding. It is also disingenuous of officers to criticise the need for a new roof. Most barn conversions need a new roof, timbers, insulation and slates. 3, 2 previous surveys did not identify any evidence of bats emerging from the barn during surveys. We were only advised a few weeks ago about the need for an updated bat survey. 4, the barn is in good draining countryside and we are confident that surface water can be discharged sustainably. 5, we dispute a public footpath crosses the site. In summary, this is an opportunity to retain an historic building which is the only remnant of the Gethley hamlet, so it needs to be retained, not only for Laura's benefit, but for posterity as part of the county's heritage. It will provide a dwelling for a local person who is unable to find any accommodation locally, which is either affordable or close to a family for the support she needs after a devastating time. This is not, I stress, not a new build dwelling in any shape or form. It is a conversion, no extensions are needed, existing openings will be used, and materials will be traditional, so stone, wood and slate, which are entirely appropriate to the OMB. We urge members to support this application, and if a deferral is needed for a new bat survey, we will gladly oblige. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, David. And do you want to come back on any of those points, particularly H4?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's officers are respectful of Mr. Glasson's interpretation of H4. I think, we would respectfully disagree with that. And like I said, that is entirely consistent with our decision-making on this site. Say part of the barn was rebuilt in 2012, that is effectively new build. I appreciate it was, as I understand, done with some of the original materials. And whilst, yes, sometimes barns do require new roofs, this fundamentally, though, is well beyond that, and that point has been our consistent approach throughout. Yes, some barns do require repair during the course of conversion, but again, I think the photographs, the plans, and say the fact that part of the build was needed to be rebuilt in 2012, the overall amount is, and we remain that position, respectfully understanding what Mr. Glasson is saying, that is not what the spirit of the policy H4 is, not seeking to permit buildings like that to be brought back into residential use. So again, I don't feel that our position and our advice to you members is misleading and is wholly negative. It is wholly consistent with our approach and interpretation of our policies since the original planning application, and say that's been borne out through appeal decisions, that the case has been made that this would facilitate with the running of the family farm. However, this application has not been made on the basis of a TAN 6 dwelling, as I said in the presentation, and the consideration of TAN 6 was considered in a previous application and did not meet the tests at that time. So I'm not sure I can say much more there, Chair. I'm happy to come in further to any member discussion, but I think if I can clarify that our position is say, consistent and not misleading, and we have correctly interpreted the spirit of policy H4 that is seeking to preserve buildings and bring buildings into reuse on the basis that they are structurally sound and capable of being done so without substantial rebuilding.
Okay, thank you for that. We go to members now. Councillor McKenna.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Andrew for your presentation, and thank you to Mr. Glasson for speaking on behalf of the applicant today. I am here today speaking both as the ward member and as a member of the planning committee. Firstly, I appreciate that there has been some planning history around this site. However, as we are always reminded at these meetings, we have to look at each application within its own merit. This is a new application with amendments, biodiversity enhancements, and a different applicant who I now believe is the new owner. When on site, the applicant also mentioned offering a voluntary Section 106 contribution, although I don't know if this has actually been confirmed. I know that they're here today, so maybe this is something that they or their agent could confirm. When I look at applications, I like to look at them with balance and fairness in mind. So what are the pros, what are the cons? Is the application enhancing the community and its environment? And I do this coupled with planning guidance in mind. Now, please forgive me if I am incorrect in saying this, but my understanding is that is simply that. It is guidance. It is not legally binding or set in stone. Now, just as we looked at Hebron Hall in Monmouth, which again we're looking at today, Langdedford Reservoir and several others over recent months, we sometimes take the guidance with a pinch of salt. And as a planning committee, we don't always follow the recommendation of officers for approval or refusal. We look at them in balance. Do the pros outweigh the cons? Is it enhancing the area and the environment, etc.? So when I approached this application, I could see that there was some planning history. However, when you strip it back, I believe that there are more benefits to this application than there are negatives to it. This barn has been standing within the open countryside of the Park House for some 300 to 400 years. The footprint has always been there. It is not a building that has suddenly appeared on the landscape, out of character, ugly, constructed of materials that don't fit in, or scars the landscape. It is an old stone barn constructed of local pudding stone. At the site visit, we were shown pictures some 30 years ago with a full roof of Welsh slates and a barn of what appeared to be in good condition. We have heard how the Welsh slates unfortunately got stolen in the 90s, and indeed I remember this was a regular occurrence back then with old barns and rural dwellings due to the value of the slates. Unfortunately, this led to the deterioration of the barn and repair works had to be carried out. And as we saw from the site visit, this has been sympathetically done and in character using local materials. As Mr. Glasson has pointed out today, old barns are always going to need maintenance. And I question whether we can truly call this a new build in the open countryside, taking into consideration that the barn has been standing there since approximately 1700. When this application was previously submitted, there were approximately 12 letters of support from the local residents. Now, common sense would tell me that the community would like to see this barn used as a residential dwelling for a local female farmer who has lived in the area all of her life. There are benefits to bringing this into housing stock. We need more houses in Monmouthshire, in particular for young people and those in agriculture and rural enterprise. This young lady works on the neighbouring family farm. She applied and failed to purchase one of the recent affordable houses that came available in the local Devorden area. Quite simply, how can an agricultural worker afford to buy a property in the Park House area where prices frequently exceed £600,000? As a local authority, we should be encouraging and helping local first-time buyers to get on the housing market so that they can live and work locally. We have a housing shortage in Monmouthshire and an ageing demographic because, quite simply, demand is exceeding supply, which in turn raises the price of houses and pushes our young people out of the county. Indeed, this is something that friends of mine have had happen to them, and I find it quite sad to see. Further benefits include more council tax to the local authority. And as I mentioned previously, there was possibly the offer of a Section 106 contribution, again benefiting the local community and the local authority. Park House is a hamlet with a small number of residents. If this building became a residence, the occupants could bring a range of skills and contributions to enhance the vibrancy of this small community. Further to these benefits, the applicant has said she is a lover of wildlife and wishes to encourage it by way of tree planting and a wildflower meadow. She also wishes to keep bees, and as we all know, the bee population is declining, and without the bees, there's no pollination and therefore no food. So this is something that I believe is another benefit. She also works locally on the family farm and therefore is able to walk to work, which has zero impact on carbon emissions. Again, something that we need to encourage as a local authority. Now, I'll finish by saying that, as we have heard, this applicant has suffered from the most tragic event in 2020 during lockdown, which has left her disabled for the rest of her life. She needs to live locally to her work and to her family, who need to be close by to help her and support her. However, being a young lady in her 30s, she naturally wants her own independence and so doesn't want to live within the immediate vicinity of her parents, and I truly hope that they won't take offence to me saying that. The other option is that she goes into sheltered accommodation away from her place of work, which will be a cost to the taxpayer and the local authority. And as we know, Monmouthshire County Council has a very high expenditure when it comes to social care. So I believe approving this application will mitigate the burden from that happening. Another thing that I wish members to consider is what would happen to this barn if the application doesn't get approved. Is it just going to fall into disrepair and look ugly on the landscape? So to conclude, that on balance and with common sense in mind, I would like members not just to focus on the planning history of the site, but to look at it with fresh eyes and the many benefits it brings to both the local community and the local authority as a whole. I'd like to finish by asking 3 questions, if I may. Firstly, if members were minded to approve the application today, is it possible that it's within our gift that we put a rural enterprise condition on the dwelling so that it can then be of benefit to a local resident who works in agriculture or rural enterprise in the future? What was the outcome of the enforcement case? If there was an issue with the maintenance of the barn or how it was constructed, why hasn't it been taken down? And then thirdly, how long do you consider, when looking at an application like this, where you're saying it's a new build, how far down the line do we have to go before it's classed not as a new build? So, for example, could this applicant put this in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, 50 years' time? Just wondering where that sort of line is drawn. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McKenna. I think we probably should go to those questions now, Andrew.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor McKenna also. I'll come to those 3 specific questions at the end, but I've made some notes as you've gone through, so I thank you for setting out your position so clearly. I think the starting position here isn't simply planning history. Planning history is a material consideration. The starting point for the consideration of all applications is planning policy. Yes, there are some amendments with this scheme, the biodiversity enhancements, for example, but the policy, which is not guidance, it's policy, H4 is policy, those criteria are detailed and clear, and they are there to safeguard against new build development in unsustainable locations in the open countryside. I think to that regard, the point about guidance and policy and how we interpret that, this isn't guidance, this is the criterion of our adopted plan. The purpose of policy H4 is to preserve those buildings which are structurally sound and of appropriate size that don't require substantial rebuild to be brought back into use because they provide an intrinsic and valuable part of the landscape. They are otherwise a new dwelling in the open countryside. In terms of the voluntary section number 6, I haven't got much information of that before me, so I won't comment on that. And again, in terms of the planning history, these applications, including that's been before the inspector, have been considered against planning policy. And we said the footprint has been there since 1700s. Well, part of that footprint was lost and rebuilt in 2012. So to that, again, that's further develops this position, this long-standing position, that yes, it may have reused some of the original materials, but that is still effectively new build. Again, 12 letters of support. Understood, there's clearly local support for this, but that's not a reason, a material planning reason, to override the clear conflict with our adopted LDP. Similarly, you know, provision of more council tax brought in by this development, the range of skills that we brought in, all of these are not material reasons to override the clear conflict with policy H4, and say particularly that criterion C. Understood, some personal circumstances in more recent times, understood, but they would not be reason to, again, override that planning policy contradiction in terms of H4 criterion C. In terms of what would happen to the building if it was left into disrepair, well, again, that's not a reason to allow new build. You know, sometimes structures will become beautiful ruins in the countryside, and I'm afraid if the only way to bring them back into use is with such an extent of new build, that's clearly contrary to the aspirations of our policy. To your three specific questions, like I said in the presentation and noted earlier, this has not been, in terms of the rural enterprise condition, application has not been submitted on that basis. No rural dwelling appraisal, as required by TAN 6, has been submitted in support of this application. Consideration under TAN 6 was subject to a previous appeal, which was dismissed, and the appointed inspector had clear reasons then for how this proposal as an enterprise failed the relevant test. So in terms of any changes in material planning circumstances between now and then, I can't see that there is anything to depart from that decision. But again, that's not before us. This hasn't been applied for on the basis of a rural enterprise, so I don't think it's appropriate to condition as such. You mentioned the previous enforcement case. I think this was done in 2012 when the works were rebuilt. I mean, the case there was against the potential demolition of an ag building, as I understand, which was considered not to be a breach of plan and control. It wasn't. So it was closed for that reason, not that it wasn't considered in the context of a new build dwelling. And finally then, how long do you consider, where do you draw the line in terms of new build? The policy, and rightfully so, it isn't as prescriptive as that. But certainly the amount that was rebuilt in 2012 is very recent in the building's lifetime, and we've coupled with the additional new build on top of that, officers are very much of view that that still, in its total, is far and beyond what would be in the realms of conversion. So succinctly, there isn't a new build becomes appropriate after 5 years, 10 years for residential use in that regard. Just going to get the policy back in front of you now, if you bear with me. I think, 1 second. So, I mean, criterion E goes on to buildings less than 10 years will be given particularly close scrutiny in the context of modern utilitarian constructions. But I don't think there's a case here that is justification for this. In principle, that criterion C is still not satisfied, as it hasn't been throughout the planning history, which I would repeat is relevant to our consideration and the potential of departing from the council's previous decisions. So that does need to be factored in. So I hope I've covered all the points made, but if there's anything further, or any other members have points to clarify, I'm happy to do so.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Councillor Callard.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Andrew, for the presentation. I've heard a few things mentioned which I don't quite agree with. One of them is that a ruined barn is a blot on the landscape, and I don't believe it is particularly. I think they add character to our landscapes. And there seems to be a bit of confusion about this idea of a new development and that the building is already there. It's a new residential development. which is separate from this ruined building being there. And I do very much sympathise with the situation that the applicant finds himself in. However, I think when it comes to planning considerations, we've got to take a much longer view than what's happening right now. The decisions that we make here lasts for 100 years, 200 years. We know this barn's 300 years old, and we're talking about, is this old barn going to be lost forever? Well, that's down to the person who owns the barn. I guess they could always restore the barn, put in an application to keep it as a barn if they were interested in keeping the building. And it's quite clear, this, for me, because it seems to be so contrary to many of our policy positions, as Andrew highlighted. And what I'd really encourage this committee to do is to think how valuable consistency is for the developers and the residents in this county, that they know that when we have a policy that this council has agreed, that they won't, that they believe in the strength of that policy, that they won't just think, do you know what, the planning committee, we can just take stuff to the planning committee and they will overrule their own policies. We need to have a mind of the whole county, and that actually, if we want a healthy market for development and for bringing new houses to this county, we do need to be consistent in our decision making. So, based on the fact that this application is deemed contrary to our planning policies in this county, I won't be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Callard. Councillor Rook.
Thank you, Chair. I'm of the opinion, much the same as Councillor Callard, and just like to draw your attention to the fact that this development within the open countryside will not only bring a house, it will bring a driveway, it will bring possibility of hard landscaping, patios, sheds, all that other accoutrements that come with setting up a home and the amenity space around it. So I'm just highlighting the fact that this isn't just a house. This is the curtilage, the garden, the access, and all the other accoutrements that may end up being part of the landscape. And much the same as Councillor Callard, I cannot support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rook. I've got nobody else wishing to speak. Councillor John, I know you said you would take all your time at the beginning, but you didn't take your full time. So do you want your 2 minutes to sum up?
No, I think I would just be repeating points I've already made, to be honest, Chair. So I stand by the comments I made and endorse the comments of the applicant's spokesperson earlier. I don't have anything to add, to be honest. I'd be repeating myself. So thank you. Okay, thank you for that.
We have a recommendation from officers for refusal. Councillor Callard has proposed that we refuse. Can I have a seconder for that, please? For Councillor Rook. Richard, can we have the voting function up then, please? Clearly, if anybody wishes to approve, then they vote for they vote against refusal. But can you vote now, please? We're still short of 2 people. Can everybody submit their vote again, please?
Okay. We're up to 14 now.
Oh, we're up to 14 now. Okay.
Okay, so that's refused. That's 11 for refusal, 3 against refusal.
Thank you, Paige. We'll now move on to item 4.1 on the agenda, which was coming back to us on Hebron Hall in Monmouth. Amy.
Thank you very much, Chair. The presentation will be up with you just shortly. Thank you. So yes, this is application DM 2022-00473 from the proposed development of 7 dwellings at the land known at Hebron Hall. The application is before Planning Committee today following the July committee, where the application was presented with a recommendation for refusal based on the impact of flooding and an in-principle objection from NRW stating that the consequences of flooding could not be mitigated. Members considered the merits of the case before them and resolved to approve the application. Following this decision, the local planning authority were required by the regulations to inform NRW of the intent to approve the application due to their previous objection and concerns. A response was received from NRW on the 28th of July 2023 stating, although there are no planning conditions, in our view, available to make this proposal acceptable in flood risk terms, the following matters could be secured through condition, which may have the effect of reducing or managing down the predicted consequences of flooding at the proposed site. Therefore, we suggest the planning authority consider the following. Restricting the use of the ground floor with the intention of ensuring habitable rooms are situated at the first floor level above. The preparation of a detailed flood evacuation emergency plan, including specific measures for the residents in times of flood, and the incorporation of flood resilience or resistance measures into the design and the construction of the development. Therefore, the application is represented today with the necessary conditions as outlined in the officer's report. Specifically, the conditions include compliance with the flood consequence assessment, requiring the purchasers of each dwelling to be notified of the flood consequences, submission and compliance with the flood plan, which will detail flood resilience measures that have been put in place within the fabric of the building to enhance the protection of the building and occupiers. Following committee members' discussion at the July committee, a condition has also been added that a schedule of materials that can be salvaged from the building shall be submitted to and approved in writing, as well as a requirement for a contract of redevelopment of the site to be agreed prior to demolition of the chapel to ensure that the chapel is not lost without the new build following shortly after. In all other respects, the application remains the same. I was going to take you quickly through the slides, but I think they've gone through. So at this slide, then, you can see the proposed development of the 5 units in the long section and the 2 units at the top, which would be the 2 pairs of semis. If we go through to the next slide, again, this is the other elevation, looking at the rear of the site and the western elevation. Again, the hall, so there's some 3D images there of the proposed development in its current context. So a small single-storey building adjacent to the white single-storey building you can see on the bottom there is demolished, railings and boundary wall to be proposed at the entrance to the site, and the Mews dwellings in a linear form towards Mono Street on the other side. You can see that height of the proposed buildings in context with the nursery there. And the 2 top photographs are 3D images of coming through into Hebron Hall from Mono Street and the connection of the existing buildings and the proposed semi there on the corner where the hall currently stands. Again, this shows a site plan with the separation distances from the existing properties, which were all considered acceptable given its urban context. Again, this shows the flood mapping, which was all being considered as part of the previous discussion, and obviously we've now had a response from NRW in relation to flood implications. Again, this is the pair of dwellings. This is the rear elevation of the pair of dwellings facing onto the courtyard. And photographs of the existing chapel, Hebron Hall, as access through the little alleyway from Mono Street. Again, the rear elevation of the site, again, you can see the hall there, two-storey building at the back of the site, and the nursery building on the right-hand side. Again, another view of the back of the existing building and the back of the buildings along Mono Street. And the existing computer centre where the brick-built garage adjacent to that is proposed to be demolished, which will form the boundary of the site at its rear. Overall, the proposals represent a high quality and much needed regeneration of the brownfield site within the town centre. This would address the issues of antisocial behaviour on site and improve the quality of the built environment, as a result improving the special character of the conservation area. In addition, this would provide much needed accommodation for the town centre and a provision of 2 on-site affordable homes, which are unusual on such a small site. The applicant has already signed the 106, showing the commitment to the provision of affordable housing on the site. The proposals are considered to be acceptable, subject to the conditions now outlined in the officer's report. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. And got nobody else registered to speak on this. Councillor Fuchs was going to address this, but personal circumstances have prevented that. Just to remind everybody that we decided there was justified rationale as to why we're moving away from flooding policy. And you recall that in July, after a detailed debate weighing up the pros and cons of the proposed development, this committee used planning balance to make a judgment to depart from national planning policy in relation to flooding, given the regeneration of the site, the provision of the pedestrian link, and that the consequences of flooding could be reasonably managed with the living accommodation being on the first floor. The applications has now come back to members to agree the exact conditions for the development, as Amy has pointed out, and this has been done in consultation with National Resources Wales. So as previously agreed by this committee, the application is recommended to be approved subject to the conditions that include further mitigation in the form of flood warning and evacuation plans in the event of a flood. And you'll have heard what Amy had to say about that. So I don't know whether anybody has any particular point that they wish to raise on it. I'm just going to have to go back into the chat because I come out of the page that the rest of you are on. Just bear with me just a second and then I'll be back. Right, Councillor Easton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. At that meeting, I expressed my view that should there be that 1 in 100-year flood, the big chunk of Monmouth will be flooded in any case, and I felt that mitigation for these properties would be in balance, as we said then, and we've now got another view how to deal with that. What concerns me is that things are put to us regarding flooding, but there doesn't seem to be any mitigation measures, because this would really decimate the best part of Monmouth if it did come about. So on balance, I support my thoughts previously and I support where we are today, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Easton. Nobody else has indicated that they wish to speak. So just to reiterate, we did approve this last time. We've come back with our officers have come back with the recommendations. Richard, can we agree the recommendations, please? Can I have a proposal that we do that? Councillor Callard, seconded Councillor Powell. So, can everybody vote no, please? Still got one to go.
14 now.
Oh, it's 14 now, yeah, okay.
Okay, so that's approved. 13 for approval and one abstain.
Okay, thanks very much, Paige. So we now move on to item 4.2, which is the proposed development at Newhouse Farm Industrial Estate in Chepstow. I've got a speaker on this, but first of all, Amy.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is application DM 2022-01155. It is a hybrid application in two parts. So full planning for the erection of a roadside facility comprising petrol filling station, 2 drive-through units and associated development. And the second part is an outline application for storage and distribution, logistics or industrial manufacturing floor space associated with the development B2 and B8. That land at Newhouse Farm Industrial Estate in Chepstow. The application is presented before members today due to the objections from the Town and Community Council, who also wish to address committee. So the application site is located to the southwest of Junction 2 of the M48 at Chepstow. The field adjacent to the roundabout and access road is one of the last parcels of land to form the wider industrial estate. The site is within the development boundary and within the allocated site for industrial and business, SAE1. The plan shows the red line boundary covering the whole of the site, with a full application occupying the eastern portion of the land, as shown by the blue line. The next slide shows the block plan identifying the outline portion of the site to the west, which shows the large industrial unit, which is 158 metres long by 58 metres wide and 16 metres high, providing around 9,000 square metres of space. This application is for all matters to be reserved apart from access. The site plan shows an access created to the southern portion of the site with an internal road to the western boundary. The internal road does not form part of the application, with layout being a reserved matter, only access. The full application includes a petrol filling station to the top western corner, an associated petrol filling area, and a main kiosk shop adjacent. In addition to the top eastern portion, a drive-through restaurant with associated parking for eat-in customers. In addition, a drive-through coffee services is proposed to the southern boundary of the site, again with associated parking. The full portion of the site will be assessed via a separate and additional access off the main access road into the industrial estate. This includes 10 EV charging spaces for cars, charging provision for bikes, and the underground infrastructure for additional EV charging in the main portion of the parking area. The next slide shows the retail element in more detail, as explained in the officer's report. The retail element is not strictly in accordance with the land allocation for industrial use, as per the local development plan. However, the full assessment of policy E1 and RET4 are set out in the officer's report, and it is considered that the benefit of bringing forward an additional unit on the site is outweighed by any harm caused from a small loss in site area for non-industrial units. In addition, both developments are considered to bring in a wider economic benefit, with an estimated 75 jobs created from the retail element and circa 200 jobs created from the industrial B8 or B2 unit. If we could just go back to the previous slide to look at the access arrangements, please. Thank you. The application has been through a rigorous consultation with Highways. Objections were received from Highways, who had serious concerns over the highway safety and access into the site off the main slip road from the roundabout. A traffic assessment was provided by the applicants, which was considered to be insufficient. Further information was provided. However, Highways officers still had concerns over the suitability of the assessment and its conclusions. The information was then subject to an independent review by WSP Highways consultants, who concluded that the baseline data, level of information provided, and the conclusions drawn were acceptable. The conclusion being that the access road as existing into the site and the proposed junction arrangement is suitable to accommodate the additional traffic created as a result of the development. The reports also concluded that 2 access points off the main road are safe and that would not result in a dangerous turning or conflict of road users accessing or egressing the site. Following this second and independent review, the authority's highways officer has withdrawn their objections on safety grounds. However, concerns and objections have been received from the Town and Community Council, highways officers, active travel officers and Welsh Government trunk road officers over the potential for the restaurant and coffee drive-through to encourage pedestrian access to the site from Bulwark. Whilst there is a public right-of-way which goes through the underpass underneath the roundabout, concerns are born from the potential risk to safety from pedestrians following a desire line across the roundabout. The red line to the bottom of the plan, apologies for the little wiggly, badly drawn one, I added that, shows the existing pedestrian route from Bulwark to the north, under the underpass and out to the south of the roundabout. And the Wales Coastal Path then is shown in the bright blue line to the western side of the site. Whilst it is acknowledged that some customers may travel by foot, the large majority will be accessing the site by car. The offer is predominantly car-based services, therefore the concern relates to the minority of users of the site. Having said this, pedestrian safety is a risk and measures are required to mitigate this harm. The applicants have agreed to additional signage along the red route as shown to identify the preferred route for pedestrians. There are some concerns that this is not along the desire line and pedestrians may use the roundabout. However, the roundabout in itself is a deterrent due to the level of traffic and has suitable crash barriers to prevent pedestrians using the road. Further options were considered to create a more direct access to the retail offer. However, given the change in levels of the embankment either side of the access road and the engineering required to facilitate a full accessible ramp are far too significant. The application now proposes a pedestrian crossing at the midsection between the two proposed accesses, as you can see on the plan in the grey line, and an additional footpath linking the two on the northern side of the access road. This is considered to be unacceptable from Welsh Government's and a highway authority's point of view. Turning to the proposed elevations of the retail element on the next slide, after that one, there we go. The first slide shows the petrol filling station, a simple kiosk building with composite cladding in a light colour and a wood effect with glazing to the front. The next slide shows the drive-through coffee shop, again a single-storey building with composite cladding in different colours and glazing to the front with an elevated section in the middle. The following slide shows the restaurant facility, again following lines of the other buildings, being a shallow mono-pitched building with composite cladding and a glazed frontage. This is considered to be acceptable given the context and setting of the site close to the main road and the industrial area. The next slide shows the sections of the site, with the top section being a view facing when looking from the road surfaces, looking west, and the restaurant at the far right of the petrol station in the middle. The next section down, the middle section, shows a view looking east from the coastal path. The blue line indicates the eastern and western boundaries of the site. And section C at the bottom is looking south from the roundabout at the north of the site. So the next slide shows the planting plan for the overall site, indicating quite a high level of tree planting around the site, which is considered to be acceptable by the authority's green infrastructure and ecology officers. The last section shows the cross-section through the top of the site, showing the proposed industrial unit in context with the proposed retail buildings. This shows the difference in levels between the two elements of the site. Just to reiterate that the industrial unit is an outline only, and therefore full details of the proposals will come through at a reserve matters stage. The photographs, the next slide, show the existing access road looking up towards the roundabout. The next slide shows the existing pedestrian crossing for the Wales Coastal Path at the very southern end of the site. And the following two slides show the site when taken from the southern corner looking north towards the roundabout and beyond. Overall, the application is considered to be acceptable given the constraints of the site and the facilities and retail and industrial offer that are suitable land users in the area. They are considered to be acceptable from a highways point of view and will facilitate the use of vacant land and provide employment to the local community. Therefore, on balance, the application is considered acceptable, subject to the conditions outlined in the officer's report. It is noted we would like to add an additional condition that will require the 10 EV charging points, as shown on the block plan, to be installed prior to occupation of the buildings to ensure that they are active and available for all users. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Amy. The local ward member is Councillor Riley.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that presentation. I would like to just say a few things in favour of this. Basically, I think the petrol station will take pressure off High Beach Roundabout, which everybody would say, perhaps with the exception of the people who have the other garage just off High Beach Roundabout, that is bound to be good. The employment prospects are also very, very welcome. My main concern is the safety of the roundabout, which I don't think can be dismissed. This type of takeaway is very likely to attract school children in the area who will and do take the shortest, most direct route, and there will be danger on that roundabout. And I don't relish any prospect of I told you so's in the future if someone is hurt. So I would like to see more consideration given into the safety of the most direct route from Bulwark to the takeaway site. And apart from that, which I feel very, very strongly about, I've also recently done some consultation in Thornwell, where lots of the residents actually complained about rubbish from a takeaway where people dump their rubbish after they finish what they're eating, and there's a fair chance people will start eating as soon as they leave the site. So I would ask, is there any consideration given to the extra bins being placed on the route that these people are likely to take going home? I appreciate most people will be travelling by car, but there will be local and very, very likely children who will be walking. So that's really all I've got to say on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. There's a couple of points there which probably are worth picking up now, Amy.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm happy to reply to those now. So firstly, in relation to rubbish, we did ask for additional bins to be put on the site plan, which have been placed on there. However, we cannot control people's behaviour in terms of dropping rubbish. We do expect people to be socially responsible, use the bins provided on site, and to dispose of their rubbish properly. That's not essentially a role for planning to take to manage that. In relation to the roundabout and pedestrians crossing the roundabout, I think we actively want to discourage people using the roundabout. There are no footpaths across the roundabout. There are crash barriers preventing people from using the roundabout. The underpass is there to encourage people to safely get from Bulwark to the south of the roundabout, and the pedestrian route then follows that towards the site. There's also been an agreement that the applicants will provide additional signage along that route, which will be secured through a section 106 to show people where they need to go in order to access the site. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Amy. Councillor Bin.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I have serious concerns about another development of this nature in Monmouthshire. Our corporate plan states we are striving for a green place to live and work with reduced carbon emissions and making a positive contribution to addressing the climate and nature emergency. We also recognise that people who cannot afford to own and run their own vehicles already face barriers to accessing training and employment in Monmouthshire. Firstly, what evidence do we have that this site will only be used by passing motorists and that it will not induce demand and not adversely affect the vitality of neighbouring town centres? And secondly, for young people, inaccessibility of work is cited as the most common obstacle to getting employment. To ensure that individuals who do not have access to a car are not further disadvantaged by this development, we need to ensure that there is adequate infrastructure to guarantee that residents can visit the site safely without a motor vehicle, both as visitors and as members of the workforce. If members are minded to approve today, we need to include a controlled pedestrian crossing near the site at the very least. And as a fellow councillor has already stated, I'm also concerned about the litter produced on the site, as the other Euro garages sites are rather filthy, to put it lightly. So if we could encourage them to keep the site clear, if this planning is does go ahead, then whatever powers we can use, I'd be for using them. Thank you.
Okay, thanks to Councillor Payne. This is a good point to bring in the speakers on this. First one I've got is Councillor Dominic Power.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to address the Council here. I think Chepstow Town Council, whilst it appreciates the employment opportunities that are provided by this application, and we do recognise that, Chepstow does need to have enhanced employment opportunities for its young people at the moment. I think that our overriding concern when we debated this particular application in the Planning Committee was as Councillor Riley has mentioned, the safety of people using the site, not having cars, i.e. going via cycles or via pedestrian access. The site neighbours Thornwell and Bulwark, and there will be quite a number of people attracted to it who essentially, I appreciate that we've heard representation that there is an underpass and there is an existing footpath that takes you an indirect route. That I have concerns about not being used, and in fact what will be used is essentially the roundabout and going over it, irrespective of the barriers that are in place at the moment. I mean, speaking personally, I have to use that roundabout to get to work every day, and the amount of people that are actually walking in high-vis jackets and things like that, and doing exactly that at the moment are quite numerous. At a time when the particular roundabout on the M48 is heavily used and it's quite congested. So I do think that that is an overriding safety concern, and indeed that is why Chepstow Town Council, when it last debated this, said that insufficient consideration had been given to allow this to progress forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Power. Good point to bring in Matthew Gray.
Thank you, Chair. On behalf of EG Group, I would like to thank committee for the opportunity to address you today in relation to the hybrid planning application proposing just over 9,000 square metres of B2, B8 floor space in outline form and full planning permission for the erection of a roadside services at Newhouse Farm Industrial Estate. The industrial estate comprises a well-occupied wider site located to the immediate south of the M48. The site's been allocated for employment-generating development and planning policy at a local level for in excess of 10 years. Viability issues surrounding the development of the application site are significant. The most recent employment land review published by the Council identified topographical challenges and limited options for access, meaning that a viable solution coming forward enabling its development was deemed as unlikely. The application proposes slightly in excess of 9,000 square metres of B2, B8 floor space, which accords with the long-term unfulfilled allocation of the site. To enable the floor space to be delivered in accordance with market requirements and operator interest, it is proposed in outline form. The M48 roadside services is proposed with full details provided. This element of the scheme comprises enabling development, adding viability to the scheme as a whole. In the context of the proposed services, the site location immediately south of the M48 comprises a fundamental element of evidencing its suitability to serve passing motorists. A need for the facility has been evidenced and accepted by the Council's professional officers. The proposed development will serve the requirements of passing motorists, including EV charging at a level in excess of the 10% requirement of Planning Policy Wales, with the ability to significantly increase provision over time. Comments from objectors are noted and acknowledged, notwithstanding the proposed development has been deemed acceptable by Welsh Government Transport, the Council's highways engineers, and via third-party independent review undertaken by respected highways consultancy. In respect to pedestrian access, the development is clear in its intentions to serve passing motorists primarily. Notwithstanding, at the request of officers, a pedestrian crossing and shortening of the walking distances from residential areas are proposed. Evidence has been provided and accepted by officers highlighting that the topography of the wider site, including a 30-degree slope, would result in engineering and earthworks, which would result in the development as a whole being unviable if lines of desire on 2D plans are followed. Beyond highways, statutory consultees have confirmed no objection to the proposed development in respect of land use policy, ecology, archaeology, amenity, flood risk, noise, drainage, and arboricultural matters. Finally, the roadside services will deliver in the region of 75 jobs. Based on employment density guidance provided by the UK Government, it would be a realistic expectation for the B2, B8 floor space to result in the creation of in the region of 200 new positions. The significant job creation across a wide range of job types comprises a material consideration in the determination of the application. In summary, as members will be aware, Section 38 of the Town and Country Planning Act requires decisions to be made in accordance with the development plan unless other material considerations dictate. This proposal will enable the development of a site which has been allocated for employment purposes for in excess of 10 years and will result in significant job creation in the region of 275 jobs holistically. It represents a significant vote of confidence in both Newhouse Farm and Monmouthshire.
Thank you very much, and you managed to do that with 8 seconds to spare, which was pretty good, really. Councillor Eason.
Thank you, Chair. I concur with all the positives that are go for this site. I also understand the concerns about pedestrian access, etc., etc. But when Newhouse Industrial Estate was designed, it was designed to be fed off the main, as a Newhouse roundabout, to the main roundabout at the bottom of that slope, and all the units will be fed off that roundabout. We're now being asked to introduce 2 further access points on that slope road to the roundabout. I think that will be a cause of future accidents. Particularly if vehicles like cars will be going into the first unit, which will be the Costas and not what, they're going to be in a position where lives will be shunted. And then the further one down to the industrial section might create a similar situation. I would like to see an opportunity to put a filter lane in the first entrance for the cars, etc., into the Costa place, but traffic to the industrial estate at the bottom to come back up into the industrial bit. So there'll be no right turn to the industrial unit, but there'll be a filtered lane to the services area. I am sure that with cars coming off the M48, that road at the moment is occupied by HGVs. Cars don't use it at the moment. Well, very few cars use it at the moment. HGVs come off that road. They may be doing 30 mile an hour. They may be within the limit. But to slow down an HGV on that slope could, I think, be a possible accident waiting to happen, unless you can get the cars and lorries apart. And I would like to see a slip lane into the services, and no right turn further on down into the industrial unit. They'd have to go around and come back up. It would also protect the crossing for the Wales Coastal Path. I am concerned about safety of people on that road. Pedestrians, I understand, and I don't know how we're going to solve that. But cars, we can protect the cars by getting the lorries away from the cars. I don't know whether the agents feel that's a possible way forward, but I think you've got to keep the cars off. You've got to keep the cars and lorries apart, otherwise you're going to have a shunt. Thank you, Chair.
it's unusual, but if you wanted to respond on that, Matthew, I'll let you.
I mean, in terms of the points, the comments are welcomed. I can only really reiterate what we said earlier. In terms of highways, the application has been rigorously assessed by Welsh Government Transport, the Council's highway engineers, and twice via third-party independent consultants who have all deemed it okay well, more than okay, acceptable in terms of a highway safety perspective.
Okay, thank you for that. Amy, did you want to come back on that, or is that response okay?
Yes, that's fine. I can come back on all the points that was raised, or if there are more, I can do it. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, Councillor Callard.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with what you said, Tony, about that right turn filter lane. It seems like a good idea to me. But I had a couple of questions. One of them was about the chargers installed. I must admit I support the idea of future-proofing the car park with chargers in the ground, because in 15 years' time, the number of fuel stations will become less useful to passenger cars. So I wondered about what kilowatts the 10 parking spaces, which are going to be open before it opens, are going to provide. And I would hope it would be more than 50, because if it's 7, they'll be of no use to anybody particularly. So if it'd be more than 50, that'd be great. And also, just picking up on Councillor Bryn's point about the difficulty young people have accessing these, working sites. That underpass, I know the underpass is shared use because it serves as a cycleway across the side of the Old Severn Bridge, but is the footpath that goes along towards this site, is that, are you allowed to cycle on it as well? Yeah, okay, that's fine then. That question's answered, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Callard. Councillor McConnell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, everyone. This has been quite interesting, and I enjoyed the site there, and thank you for the report. I'll try and keep this relatively brief. I've agreed with a lot of points that were made. There are a lot of positives about this, and it would be good to see this go through. Likewise, with colleagues, I've been quite concerned about safety. And on that entrance road, the slip road going down, those of us that visited had the deep joy of walking across it twice in order to access the site. Now, Amy may be able to remind us, there were 2 potential crossings to get to so the higher crossing was the one that was the natural way to walk to the site. And I remember standing there with cars going with vehicles going at considerable speed down that slipway. I do think that the number of cars accessing the site must increase if that site is going to be a successful business venture. And that'll be primarily cars which are coming off a slip road, having been doing significant speed before that. So it would be quite likely that cars will continue to travel at speed down that slip road. And so I would concur with Tony, Councillor Eason, but I would also, we looked at where a suitable pedestrian crossing could be made for pedestrians accessing that retail site, and felt it was the higher of the 2, which would be in a good line of sight for drivers, but also the most direct route for walkers. And that would be a small ask, I think, to attach as a condition that was installed. So that's my question. Could that happen?
Okay, thanks for that. It strikes me that more often than not, when people are driving down that road to access the site, it isn't like an ordinary road where there's a stream of traffic coming the other way. There's only lorries coming up, and they're not as frequent as cars on a normal road would be. It's just an observation. Councillor Rock.
Thank you, Chair. As a representative from Chepstow as well, I have those similar concerns of people walking around the roundabout rather than using Cowent Tunnel and the coastal path to access a site. The only difficulties we have around trying to mitigate the possibility of residents walking around the roundabout is not, in my opinion, through this application. The roundabout is the responsibility of the Trunk Road Agency, and they would be the body that we would need to speak to talk about restricting the pedestrian access onto that roundabout. I'm in favour of this application for the employment opportunity there. It still doesn't detract from the concerns we have around walkers onto the site, but I don't think that we can deal with that through this application. I think there's still work that can be done around mitigating the possibility of pedestrians walking around a roundabout, but that is not through this application. I think it's through the Trunk Road Agency and seeing if they're able to do something on that junction, on those junctions around the roundabout, to prevent pedestrians walking there. So, as much as I'm certainly aware and have similar concerns over the pedestrian access to the site, I don't think there's very much we can do with regards to this application. So in its current form, I have to agree to support it, but still work with Trunk Roads Agency to look at possible solutions to prevent pedestrians accessing the roundabout. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Rook. There's a couple of notes on here, but when I ask you to come back in, perhaps you can deal with Amy. But with regards to Councillor Easton's point, there was an independent traffic assessment, wasn't there? Do you want to come back in now, because nobody else indicated that they wish to speak, unless they have since I last looked at the list?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much, Chair. So yeah, hopefully I'll cover all the points. So firstly, in relation to the site, it is allocated for employment. It was considered by the inspector through the LDP process and reviewed to be appropriate site for employment use. So that has been allocated and has been in the plan for some considerable time. It is the plan then, the policy supports employment use on the site. So obviously we do want to be encouraging all forms of access to the site, and there is the underpass there that provides that suitable access from Bulwark to the south to the industrial estate. So accessing the site, we don't want to be encouraging that across the roundabout, and I completely understand the concerns that some people may access the site across the roundabout. However, we have done everything possible to discourage that, and we can't use land use planning policies to change people's behaviours in that respect. There is the roundabout in itself is a deterrent, the crash barriers are a deterrent, and the idea is to encourage people to use the underpass with the signage that's going to be put in place to access the site in a far more safe and appropriate manner. There were issues mentioned whether we can upgrade the roundabout or make alterations to the roundabout, but as Councillor Rook has mentioned, the roundabout is in Welsh Government ownership, and any alterations to that roundabout would need to make sure that they are fully compliant with highway safety and the visibility of drivers, so we can't have large barriers restricting visibility around the roundabout. In terms of the pedestrian linkage, it isn't exactly on the desire line, but in order to achieve a full desire line, Phil, I don't know whether you could put the site plan back up first, please. In order to be able to achieve a desire line as you come out of the underpass towards the site, you would have to climb up the embankment, which is quite a significant slope. And in order to be able to provide a fully accessible ramp up that slope, which requires a significant engineering operation to make sure the gradient is suitable for all users, that is financially and land hungry and very financially costly, which then will impact on the viability of the site. Yes, that's great. Thank you very much. Perfect. So yes, there are two pedestrian crossings, one existing at the bottom bottom corner of that site plan, you can see which connects the Wales Coastal Path, which is the blue line, and then the additional crossing is proposed slightly further up between the two accesses in that grey diagonal there, which is considered the most convenient place to provide a ramp which is of an appropriate gradient. So whilst I appreciate pedestrians would have to double back on themselves, that has been reduced somewhat from the existing pedestrian link towards the site. There was a mention of the impact on retail in Bulwark by providing these offers here. The survey work has shown that these aren't comparison goods, they are roadside services. The offer here is not a primary trip attractor, so you wouldn't be going to do your shopping to this site, you would be accessing the site generally by car for the provisions here of roadside servicing, and it would not divert from the comparison offer from Bulwark. As we mentioned, there are two access points here. Councillor Easton had raised concerns over those two access points from the main slip road into the site, and has also put a note in the chat, which you can't see, which was requesting a proper assessment of traffic access. There has been a full assessment in terms of a traffic assessment for this application, and it has been reviewed by the authority's highways officer, and we have also had an independent review, which isn't the norm. It is something we only do when absolutely necessary to ensure highway safety, ensure compliance with the data is sufficient, and that the conclusions drawn are reasonable and acceptable. As this was independently reviewed, I don't see a need for further assessment, and we concur with the independent review. Our highways officers are accepting of that review, that the two accesses off the slip road are considered to be safe. There's a mention of whether a third lane should be required. That was an additional concern from the highways officer originally. However, as the traffic assessment shows, the data doesn't suggest that that is a safety problem, and it doesn't suggest that that is necessary. Again, creating a third lane here would be very land hungry, very financial hungry, and would significantly impact on the viability of the proposals. In relation to the EV chargers, the infrastructure has been put, or would be put, in the ground under the main parking area between the drive-through coffee and the drive-through restaurant towards the top. So that will be there for future use. There is a condition proposed to ensure that the additional 10 EV chargers, which is, has been noted, is above the policy compliance for 10%, which would be 8. There's a condition for those to be installed prior to occupation. We could ask for full details of those charges if required at that time to ensure the 50 kilowatt was mentioned. In terms of the pedestrian crossing, the additional one at the moment, so there will be, as a result, proposed an additional pedestrian crossing which provides those two crossings. I think Councillor Bryn raised the question over whether there be one. There would be an additional one by this proposal, which would result in the two crossings. I think those were all the comments. So any other questions?
I've got nobody else indicate that they wish to speak, but Tony, you want to come back in?
Yes, thank you. I do have concerns about this safety. I use that roundabout quite frequently, as our councillor from Chepstow does. It's an extremely busy roundabout. You come up off the M48 from the Bristol side, and you're fighting with lorries going into and out of the Newhouse Industrial Estate. In fact, 6-7 months ago, a car was pushed off the road and finished up on the other side, through the barrier onto the motorway because of the congestion there. The traffic assessment is most probably a desktop affair, not a practical affair. When I say assessment, I'd like to see a proper assessment of the traffic that actually moves and how fast they go, not what the desktop says. I reluctantly support this application because it's necessary, but I reluctantly support it on the basis that I'm not happy with the traffic movements that I would expect will be there. I don't want to be criticised in the future as a member of the planning committee agreeing to an application when we find there may be accidents. I won't go further than saying what they might be, but I don't want to see any accidents, and I don't want to be put on my shoulders supporting this application today. I'll support the application, but I have deep, strong reservations. I'd like the applicant's agent to go away and really think about it, because I think it's solvable. I think that our highways officers were concerned at the time, and have now come to the conclusion on the basis of all these desktop exercises to go along with it. I don't think it's acceptable. I think there should be more done to make that road safe. That road was not designed to take traffic off unless you got to the bottom roundabout, and that was a feeder roundabout to all the estates. Now, by creating these access and egresses, it's creating a hazard. I don't see a problem egressing the sites. I do see a problem accessing the sites, and I don't want to see an accident happen. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Easton. Matthew, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, if I could, just to clarify, speed surveys were undertaken of the road. They were requested by the Highway Authority, and they were provided. So it's certainly not a desk space.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that. And your comments have been noted, Councillor Easton. Valid, I'm absolutely certain, but there you are. I don't like people coming back, but I did allow Councillor Easton, so Councillor McConnell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, for your forbearance. It's just to pick up on, there's a little lot going on in the chat, and so just to summarise, Councillor Bryn and myself both picked up when we talk about a pedestrian crossing, we're hoping for a controlled pedestrian crossing, which would in itself be a traffic calming measure, not just a drop curb, which would be a relatively slight alteration or condition that would make a difference. And I'd also comment that I'm sure speed. It's not yet built, so the traffic hasn't yet come. So reviewing the traffic that's there at the moment isn't necessarily the data that we need to be looking at. But I'll stop now. But thank you for your forbearance, Chair.
Okay, last point, Amy, before we go to a vote.
I'll just quickly clarify that as the agent has said, a full traffic assessment was done. The highways officer's response states that firstly, regarding our concerns over the appropriate use of standards for the junction design, the Highway Authority are now satisfied that the standards applied to the proposal are acceptable and supports the use of the Piccadilly hour analysis. Therefore, based on the junction capacity analysis, the junctions are considered to be acceptable in capacity terms. They've also done swept path analysis and suitable visibility displays in that respect. Yes, apologies, Councillor Bryn, I didn't fully answer your question. The crossing is a dropped curve with tactile paving as proposed at the moment. There were discussions around providing a toucan crossing, a pelican crossing, or a zebra crossing, but it was requested by the applicant that the application be considered on the proposals before you today. If members feel that an additional work is required to that crossing, then that is within your gift. However, what I would say is that the highways officers do consider the proposals as they are acceptable and do not pose a risk.
Okay, thank you, Amy. Richard, can we have the voting function up, please? Can I have a proposal for approval? Councillor Buckler, and seconded by Councillor Powell. Okay, can we have everybody vote now, please? And I know you said you won't be voting, Councillor Howells, but welcome anyway. One more.
That's Jane. Yeah, she's still 15.
Jane's gone, isn't she?
Well, it is clear anyway, isn't
There
it?
should be 13 responses, shouldn't it?
Yeah, it should be 6. The result is clear in any event, so that is approved, 10 for approval, 1 against and 1 abstain.
Okay, thank you, Paige. So we move on to the last item for consideration, which is item 4.4, which is the application with respect to the change of use from residential to mixed use on 75 St Lawrence Park, Chepstow. And Adam, you're going to present that one?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jan.
Thanks, members. You may recall this application. This site was reported to committee. I think it was 2 or 3 months ago in relation to a residential extension. This application has been submitted following objections being raised in the previous application relating to the use of the site operating a childminding service. The application seeks to regularise the use of the site as a mixed-use residential and childminders. The existing use has operated from the site for approximately 6 years. We've had significant representations received for this application, both in favour and in opposition. The application site is within the settlement boundary where there's a presumption in favour of development and is in a residential area where such uses are needed and required. No physical changes are proposed as part of this application. The site would still appear as a residential dwelling and would not look out of place within its setting. It is well established in case law that a childminding use can operate from a residential dwelling without constituting a material change of use or require planning consent for up to 6 children when operated by 1 person from their property. The use operating from this site offers a service typically for 6 children, but can sometimes exceed this number and has an additional member of staff. The intensity of the use is not considered to be significantly higher than what would be considered not to constitute a change of use, nor is it considered to be unacceptable in this location in respect of the principle of development, highway safety, vehicular movements generated, or to be unacceptably harmful to the living conditions of neighbouring occupiers. The business as existing has a parking scheme and programme and noise management plan to ensure that the impact is mitigated to what is considered by the local planning authority to be an acceptable level. The local authority's highway department has been consulted on this application and raises no concern in relation to highway safety or the capacity of the highway network. The council's environmental health department has been consulted on this application and raised no objection in respect of noise or impacts upon neighbouring occupiers. A number of objections received focus upon impacts upon neighbours and highway issues. These have been considered by the authority and are considered to be acceptable, therefore would not warrant the refusal of this application. Additionally, a number of objections focus on a restrictive covenant attached to the deeds of the properties on St Lawrence Park. This falls outside the remit of the Town and Country Planning Act and therefore would not constitute a reason for planning consent to be withheld. In conclusion, it is considered that this application to regularise the existing use of the site is acceptable, and it is recommended that planning consent is granted, subject to conditions limiting the overall number of children cared for and total staff members employed to facilitate the use. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. And just to note that Chepstow Town Council recommends refusal, but they're not here to talk to us today. We have got a video recording from the local member, Councillor Pavia, which I believe you're going to play, Phil. Yeah.
Given the level.
Let me try this. No.
Answering your question in the chat. No, it's not coming from there.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Committee, thank you for accepting my video submission in reference to application DM 2023-00939, which is before you today, and apologies that I could not be there in person. As with the previous application associated with this property that was dealt with by the Planning Committee in July, application 0032, this too is a delicate and contentious application with other residents in the vicinity. Given the level of local objection, it is only right that the Planning Committee scrutinise the change of use proposal in detail so as to ensure full transparency to the process. The background... The rationale behind the enforcement investigation and subsequent application for change of use are clearly laid out in the report. We know from the significant number of objections raised, the vast majority of which are from residents in St Lawrence Park, that they are concerned about a range of issues such as noise and disturbance relating to activity on the site, loss of own personal amenity, lack of parking and road safety issues, and other issues such as pollution, all of which are listed in section 5.2. Essentially, whether a residential location in a dense estate and limited cul-de-sac is suitable for such business use. However, we know that the business has been operating on the site for some period of time, 2017 I believe, and is known by both Monmouthshire County Council Early Years Services and by the regulator Care Inspectorate Wales. It should also be noted that there are also a large number of supporting correspondence from affected parents and from people who know the applicant, although it should be recognised that a good number do not live in the near vicinity. Praise the professional way in which the child-minded business is operated, emphasise the local acute need for such child-minded services, and highlight the provisions that are in place that aim to mitigate disruption. For example, my understanding is that the applicant has a number of policies that our clients are expected to adhere to in order to mitigate the impact of such issues as noise and parking disruption. However, as I do not live in the vicinity of the property, I am unaware as to whether these policies do reduce impact and whether such mitigation steps are felt to be acceptable by those neighbours dwelling close to the property. It is these residents that are the ones that live there in the cul-de-sac, and that is why so many of them have been felt compelled to respond to the application's consultation so that their voices can be listened to by the committee. There is an acknowledgement in some of the objecting comments that there have been improvements to noise and disruption over recent months. However, the view reflected is that this has been predominantly due to the planning applications pending in the system, and that once this final application is approved, then problems may well arise. The planning committee needs to fully satisfy itself that the residents living directly in the vicinity of the property will not have their own personal peace and amenity infringed if the application is approved, and whether any further conditions should be imposed. The applicant has informed me that they have no intention of extending their childminding business, and I have to accept that at face value. However, there is a degree of scepticism amongst their near neighbours as to whether this is the case in light of the previous approved application. If the committee is minded to approve the application, then the committee should be mindful of the conditions that the case officer has stated in his report, which will provide neighbours with some level of comfort and reassurance. I hope the committee will carefully reflect on these matters that I have raised in its deliberations. Thank you.
Well, we got there in the end. Well done. Adam, was there anything in there that you wanted to pick up?
I think the only thing to make reference to is that the policies that are in place at present have been submitted and form part of this application, and therefore form part of the approved documents. Therefore, non-compliance with those documents would give us a greater level of control than we have at present, or a greater level of control if this was a use that did not require planning consent. So in terms of impact, I think that does, I'm satisfied that the conditions that are suggested and the fact that those documents form part of the approved plans give us a level of control and certainty that there would not be any unacceptable adverse impact in either the impact of the living conditions of neighbouring occupiers or in terms of highway or pedestrian safety.
And I suppose if there's anything else, it would come under environmental health anyway, wouldn't it?
Yes, there would be statutory powers that the authority has that we would be able to rely upon. However, in this instance, the use as proposed is not considered to result in anything that would result in a statutory nuisance. The use here is not considered to be of a level that would get to that point, but that there are those options available to the authority if needed.
Okay, thank you for that. Everybody had the opportunity to go there when it came before us before. I've got nobody indicating that they wish to speak this time. So can I have a voting function up then, please, Richard? Motion. Oh, yeah. Motion to approve was Anne and Maureen. Can you vote no then, please?
Great, so that's approved, that's 12 for approval.
Thank you for that. That's the end of the applications before us, but we do need to note some appeals received. So, Andrew, have you got that? Oh, Phil, have you got them?
Yeah, it's just a note really, members, that we receive appeals and obviously we report them generally quarterly to you. So that's actually not that many in number, there's only 2. So that's quite a good sign because appeal generally is waste in the system. And we'd like to think our pre-application and advice will weed out a lot of applications which would, if they came in without pre-app, would be refused. So hopefully that's a good sign that there aren't that many appeals. So just a note, thank you.
Thanks for that. In that case, that's everything before us today. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time.